recording or in other ways studying the changes that take place. And this is naturally a difficult task. I may need to go back many times in order to get my picture straight, to see how it does it under certain different circumstances, to work out all the ramifications of it. And for me, my own reason for being interested in these things at all is that as a writer, as a philosopher, it is my great life game to describe what is allegedly undescribable. And for example, there's a drug called dimethyltryptamine, DMT for short. And this is a 40-minute run where your consciousness is really screwed up.
So Alan Watts used DMT, and he actually took notes by recording his experience into a microphone, into a tape recorder, and then later listened to the tape recorder and remembered what he could, but basically took the facts, the factual information that he said into the tape recorder and shared it in this video.
And I was told about this, and I inquired of the doctors whether it was, dangerous or harmful or would leave you with the heebie-jeebies. And they said, no, it doesn't do anything like that. It's just about 40 minutes of sheer insanity. And they said it renders people speechless. Well, I said, it won't render me speechless. Oh, they said, no, you come off it. So, all right, I said, I'll bet you anything you like. Give me a tape recorder and give me this chemical, and I will tell you just exactly how it feels in a coherent way. Well, wow, they gave me the first shot, which was about 1.3 cc, and although there was a kind of vaguely interesting change, nothing much happened. So then they gave me 1.9 cc, I think. And then it came on. It was as if, say, your elbow, as a point in my field of vision, suddenly came at me, but in a spiral pattern, against the background that was spiraling the other direction. See, so you've got this sort of thing going on. And then this suddenly caught hold of my body, sucked it into the system, and twisted my body into the same spiral motion. And that everything started seeming to go like this, and it was all converted into brilliantly illuminated plastic. So that it became a cross between a toy shop and Times Square, vaguely menacing. And, you hardly knew which way up you were. And so it was difficult, but patiently, I talked into the tape recorder every single thing that was going on and what it was like. Now, a lot of people would say, well, you shouldn't do that. That it destroys the experience when you talk about it. It doesn't. That's the funny thing about all these things, that they're much more interesting when you do some work with them.
Okay, so Alan Watts is talking about how he felt like he was drawn into a spirally moving flow. And I'm saying that was the ether that was flowing in a spiral. Okay, so, so Alan Watts said that he felt himself pulled in, pulled in like a man being pulled in to a spiral pattern that was flowing one direction, while the rest of the world was flowing in an equal and opposite direction, like this. So these little arrows are going that way, and then there's some point at which we have equal and opposite flow, like this, which goes away and smaller into the distance. You see? And so this is an etheric flux flow pattern. Now, this is just like if you had dust in the universe. Well, a particle of dust might follow this trajectory. okay? And if it's here, it might get sucked in and get flowing in the opposite direction, or if it's over here on this side of the biphoton pair that's being formed in the Big Bang, which one photon goes in the opposite direction of the other, so these photons are entangled. So if you're a speck of dust in the receding photon, you might get sucked into it and then follow this trajectory. And if you're a speck of dust near this photon, and there's a certain pattern that if you exist in that conical pattern, if you're a piece of dust that exists in that conical pattern, then you will get sucked into that photon, into that photon's path, like Alan Watts' body got sucked in. So he must have been inside this conical. See, every creation of a photon has a conical, that's not very straight, is it? Has a conical path where anything in that will get sucked into that photon.
The work seems to throw something into the experience, and then it gives you another task back. And that all adds to the interest of the thing. And I found out that in working with these things, there was no further conflict between the intellect and the intuition. That the more you intellectualized, the more the intuitive insight sprung up to correspond to the intellectual.
And so what Alan Watts has just said is that if you can allow yourself to have these visionary experiences, whether it's in dark lighting, like that's how I do it, in complete blackness, only in my mind, or I might have a candle, or my eyes closed, or I could just be driving my car and get a flash of insight. But it usually comes when it's dark and my eyes aren't being stimulated, so that my mind has more, I guess, intellectual capacity to imagine. And well, that's the only way you can make progress in science, is to have that ability to imagine. And I disagree with Georgia Tech's physicist, Dr. Finkelstein, when he says that you can't imagine quantum physics. Well, to me, okay, maybe that's a fact. You can't imagine quantum physics. I would agree. Okay, I would agree with what he said. But to me, that's just a sign that quantum physics can't go any further if you can't even imagine. Because if you can't imagine, how are you going to take the math to the next level? I think that if you imagine a universe starting from the ether, from the void actually, and then you get the ether moving and you see what form of flow patterns the fluid takes from a chemical engineering perspective, simple fluid dynamics, not necessarily simple, but simple in that it's mundane and we see it every day on this level of the universe. Well, it also holds at smaller scale. And so if you can think about the universe as a fluid, and how would it flow, and if it flowed that way, then what would happen, and then what would happen, and how would things be formed, and how does inertia form, you would then build this very universe with the molecules that we see and the biochemicals that we see in our bodies. So there's merit in allowing oneself to visualize and meditate on scientific theories. And I think that DMT, for those that are intelligent, able to record their journeys and able to report it and share it with others, can help science. Just like Alan Watts has confirmed for me, further confirmed for me, that my thoughts are valid because people on DMT are thinking of them. Some people might argue that, oh, that's proof that it's invalid. But I beg to differ, because if these visions come to people all over the world, there must be something to it. I mean, you can't just ignore that. And I wouldn't need Alan to tell me this, that it's true, that this vision is true, that fluid really flows this way, because I already knew it, because there's no other way it could flow, because there's no other way a tornado could flow. That's the way fluid flows. It's just like it flows that way because the outside fluid pushes the inside fluid a certain direction, and there's this cause and effect and this co-creation of phenomenon. And in the same way, I think that the mind on DMT, at least Alan Watts' mind on DMT on that particular trip, was tapped into that reality of the universe. And perhaps he had thought about physics himself and already knew about flow of fluids, and maybe he knew about the Bose-Einstein condensates and some of the toroidal patterns that are formed in supercooled liquids, because you see these toroidal patterns forming at very, very small scales. At, like, say, when you have liquid hydrogen, these things will spontaneously form. So these patterns of flow exist at all levels, not just the tornado, not just the big galaxy of the Milky Way that's spiraling, but also at smaller levels, big, medium, small, and then down smaller to infinity and upward to infinity.
And so, instead of, therefore, having a session in which you just curl up and go into your own little private womb and let it take over, and you come back and all you can say is, man, it was a gas. See? So what? What's the point of going on a heroic journey and not bringing something back?
And you can't really have any kind of information storage unless you have things, entities, thingies that can be stopped in time, so that you can have this package or this pattern of stopped things to compare at this time to something in the future time that's stopped things. So by stopped things, I mean like pieces of matter that are stored in a certain way that store information, like words on a page. Those are pieces of ink molecules on paper. And you can also have, clocks with moving hands, okay? Or, but can you imagine information being stored just in light only? It would be spread out so far. And I do think that light alone can store information, but matter can store much more information in smaller regions of space. So that's where matter brings forth a new way of having consciousness and information sharing, which is ultimately kind of what two egos that love and hate come from. It comes from matter. And once you have matter, you have storage of information, and you have the opportunity for agreement versus disagreement. And that's kind of like where humans come in, because we're made of matter. We exist in a matter/light reality. Whereas if you go out into the interstices of the galaxies, where it's mostly just kind of like fluctuating ether, there's not as much information shared per cubic mile, So, I don't know, it's just a way to think about it. A bit of a digression, I guess, but nevertheless a fascinating one. Let's see if Alan Watts has anything else to say before we close.
The whole point, in every myth, heroes who take strange journeys must bring back a feather of the fabulous bird, a claw of the dragon, or the beheaded head of the villain that they slew, saying, see, here it is. So I always feel it's necessary in any of these adventures to bring something back. And so you get the great, intense fun, really the most stimulating thing, of saying we're going to devote this session to the study of a particular problem.